board, before we get started, something I failed to bring up to you in board meeting on the assistant superintendents and other personnel going to the assistant superintendent contract position. We just felt like, of course, it's a law, and that becomes effective October, but it's going to go into effect for us next fall. Accountability assistant superintendent.
It's effective now.
This fall, okay. So in line with what we've been doing with principals, what we've been doing with personnel throughout the county, we just want to take the opportunity to, let you know that on the senior staff, you have all of those going to an assistant superintendent position if they choose to. They don't have to if they choose to, but then they become under contract. And I think this is a good thing. I think some of y'all talked about work performance, accountability, things of that nature. And I think you have several folks on contract that are held to that standard, such as the superintendent, CSFO, and our board attorney. And people at this level, I think, need to be able to show you that they're a good return on investment. And so with that, we're going to be bringing to you a salary matrix for the senior staff, and which falls in line with everything that we've been doing for the last couple of years. We want to bring that to you, hopefully in, John, when we're talking October, maybe? September. John, G, do you have something you want to say about that?
I can just give them the timeline. Very quickly. So, if y'all remember what we did on principals, we're not going to do that again. Hopefully y'all remember the matrix and how we kind of went back and tabulated. It'll be the same thing. This was the law that we got Senator Elliott introduced, and Mr. Baker worked really hard to get passed for us. This allows, Mr. Tyler said a minute ago, accountability, transparency. We see that our high school principals are held accountable through those new contracts and through that compensation system. This is taking that eventually to the assistant principals, and in this case to the assistant superintendents. So the goal is to come back in September with a salary schedule that addresses senior staff and put that before the board. If the board elects to do that, well, it's not required that we disseminate the salary, but in transparency, that's kind of what we've recommended. And I'm hoping that's the course the board will want to take, is to go ahead and disseminate it for September and then vote on it. John, October will be the final vote, and have that in front of you guys to address the senior staff. And then I think around November, December, we're going to start working on assistant principals, and then that'll be the last check in the box. If y'all have any questions, happy to.
Yes, sir. You talk about senior staff. Is this going to include our CSFO, our superintendent, and our attorney? Did we do all that at one time?
We honestly haven't really talked about it to that level. But if I was the board, it's just going to come back to you again. I think Mr. Wilson's, it would be up to the board. It would take a couple of days to put something together because we're going to continue to try to use the same matrix. But we could present that to the board and you could take a look at all the senior staff. I think the intent was to come with assistant superintendents. But you're right, you're just going to turn back around and have to do them as well. So you may want to take it all at one time, and then the board can decide what to do or not do at that time. Do you want that presented that way? Mr. President, are you in agreement? Mike?
Not completely.
Okay. They're nodding their heads, and so we could put something together and y'all could talk about it and try to get it all in front of you at one time, and then you guys could make that decision, or you could come back and do it again. So y'all talk. Sarah, can you follow up with them? Thank y'all. Any other questions from anybody? Anything else? John. Ooh, I'm sorry, it's broken. For 2 hours.
All right. Hear me okay? All right. Ready
on anything? All right, welcome to the fiscal year 2025 proposed budget first hearing. A little bit. So I'll just start off by saying, obviously a budget to the size, scale, and scope of Baldwin County is a major undertaking. And so I want to kind of thank everybody involved in this process. I want to thank all the department heads for getting me their budget in a timely manner. We're also getting ready for the start of school. I want to thank everyone in my department that worked, so hard over the last couple of weeks and months to pull this together in the way that they have, and they're here. I just want to say thank you, Marlena, Ashley, Lisa, Patsy, and others that are not here. Courtney and Crystal and Tamara and Deanna. And there's just a big team of people that work so hard every year to pull this all together because, we are a massive organization, and as you see the budget, and you see some of my budget fun facts, and just the massive scale and scope of everything that we have to work with, it takes a team, and I'm blessed to have such a strong team to work with me every day. So, that being said, everybody stretched. All right, ready or not, it's budget time, and so I hope the presentation's informative. I hope I can make as entertaining as you can make a school budget presentation and those type things. And so we'll roll right into it. So looking at this slide right here, one of the first things you do when building a budget is you want to look at what is your enrollment. The student numbers and those type of things is going to drive your plans for the school year. And so as you see here, this is an 18-year summary of kind of where our enrollment is, looking at pre-K through 12, starting from the 2007-2008 school year to the estimated or the enrollment numbers for the start of this school year. And you can see the last couple of years we've had some interesting bumps in the roads with city school splits, with COVID impact, especially as it relates to kindergarten children and those type of things. And even in this previous year, we saw, we went from an ADM increase of 800 to an ADM increase of only 188 kids. So we saw a little bit slower, and I'm going to kind of walk into those numbers as well. If you look at basically our pre-K through 12 numbers and the numbers that we showed based on the start of the school year's enrollment, it looks like we're getting back in the groove with about a 500 kid increase there, bringing us right over 32,000 for this school year. Like I said before, just to get an idea of how big this is and what an undertaking is, if you were to go line by line on the budget, it's 843 pages long. It probably is, if I was to print it out, I'd kill a bunch of trees with about 4 inches tall, weighing over 10 pounds, roughly. You can see we have about 73 different sources of funds, and 92% of those different sources are earmarked and restricted. And they can only be used for designated purposes. And I think that's something that the public is not fully aware of, is so many funds are earmarked and restricted on how they are used. Operating costs this month is $32 to $35 million. It's kind of in line with what we've seen this previous fiscal year. And during the budget hearing, guys, I'm going to be going fast, and feel free to stop me. Any questions? We can have open discussions. We can kind of have this go wherever you see fit. So I'm going to keep rolling. But if I go too fast, or anybody has any questions, concerns, or anything they'd like to talk about, then happy to talk about it. So this is the summary. This is the B1A. This is the big picture financial summary of what our budget looks like for this next fiscal year. And so for anyone who's not familiar with with governmental accounting and how those things work, we operate on a fund accounting basis. And so we have 5 main governmental funds. We have the general fund, which is where most of our operating funds occur. We have special revenue. And I'll kind of show you right here. Special revenue is where the revenue sources that are legally restricted to expenditures outside of state funds. And so this is your federal funds. This is your public school dollars at the local school level. This is going to be your 3 mil. This is going to be your CNP. All of these type funds are going to fall under special revenue. Debt service, obviously, that's where a lot of our debt payments are made. Principal and interest, capital projects, is where we're using a lot of our major capital facilities are in that fund. And then the fiduciary expendable trust fund is where the non-public funds at the local school levels are accounted for. So just kind of rolling into our projected revenue for this fiscal year. So when you kind of look at this and you look at everything all together and you look at last year's versus this year, it kind of has a shocking picture here, but just like I highlighted, this main decline is due to the ESSER ARC funding ends at the end of September. And so as you can see, we had about, probably about $28 million that rolled into the FY24. It's all been spent. The final reimbursement was submitted to the state last week. And so I know there's been news articles and other things about school systems are scrambling to spend $500,000 here and there. Baldwin County is not one of those school districts. Everything is spent. I don't understand why school districts are running around panicking at the last minute because everyone knew it was going to expire at the end of September. And so I appreciate Ashley, Lisa, and everybody that worked so hard to come up with a great plan and make sure that that plan was executed to make sure all the funds were spent appropriately. So I'm going to kind of look at each of these revenue sources. I'm going to kind of dive into it. You can see the first line, state revenue. And you can see it's kind of flat. And so let's, well, before I go into that, I'll show you the breakdown of the revenue. So you can see, looking at all the revenue that we're estimated to receive in this fiscal year, we're 51% local, we're about 42% state. Federal is only about 6.5%. And then that other little sliver is basically the P-card rebate program and some rebate programs tied into our C&P program. But the P-card rebate program does bring in about $650,000 a year. So diving into your state revenue, you can see, like I said before, it's flat. And one of the main reasons that it's flat is because the biggest aspect in state revenue is obviously the foundation program. And so we see a very modest increase of the foundation program. That's where I'm going to start, and that's where I'm going to kind of drill into. And so the foundation program is driven by your ADM. What is your ADM? Your ADM is your average daily membership. It represents the average daily enrollment during the first 20 days after Labor Day of the previous school year. And it does not include pre-K students. Like I said before, if we look at the FY24, which was actually your October of, it should be the October of 22 versus the October of 23 enrollment numbers here, you can kind of see that we only saw an increase of 188 students. Now, if you backtrack to this presentation from last year, when we're looking at ADM, we saw an ADM increase of over 800 students. And so we saw a little bit of some moderation there. And also in your budget sheet there and also posted online, you can see the breakdown for every single school in the county of their earn units, their ADM, those type of things. But I kind of wanted to drill down into these numbers and kind of give a basic overview based, like I said, based on the October 22 20-day average versus the October 23, which is how the ADM for that fiscal year is calculated, to kind of give an idea and looking at schools per feeder pattern to see kind of where we saw a lot of the impact. Like I said before, just a reminder, ADM is based on last year enrollment. I will say for this current school year though, and so as you're looking at this, we had a probably decline of around 91 students per high school, and that's a result of BPA opening. And so we had 90 to 100 student drop in every high school, and that's what we wanted, and that's what we were hoping for. Because that gives, our base high schools a chance to kind of catch their breath for a little bit as we are opening up Baldwin Prep. But you can kind of see just have a brief summary of looking at some of the ADM changes. If you look in the North Baldwin Bay Manette feeder pattern, you can see they were pretty much flat over this time period, with Stapleton being the school that grew the most by 19 kids, which is a pretty big amount on a percentage basis. Zeroing into to the Daphne feeder pattern, we saw a good amount of growth with Daphne High School. I do know I think they had the largest percentage of students that actually attended BPA this school year, and so that does a tremendous amount to kind of help them. We also saw a lot of growth in the Bell Forest area. Looking at Alberta feeder pattern, we saw a lot of our growth kind of at the elementary side. Pivoting over to the Fairhope feeder pattern, you saw a lot of your growth circled around the Fairhope East area. And at Foley, you saw a lot of the growth really in the Florence Mathis, enrollment area over that period of time. Robertsdale, you saw some growth at the high school. You saw a little bit at the elementary school. For the most part, stayed relatively flat. In Spanish Fort, you saw some growth in the Spanish Fort Middle School. You also saw some growth in Stonebridge. But one thing to point out when we're looking at ADM, you can see that we had a virtual elementary school, and unfortunately the numbers dropped below the 250. When it dropped below 250, we lost all of our state funding. When we were looking at registration on the virtual elementary school, the registration numbers were about 125 students that were registered, and this was a K through 7th grade, and so unfortunately we had to close it down. It just didn't make sense to operate with the student population that low, and so you can kind of see the impact here when you're looking at the ADM growth year over year as well. And so you can kind of see the Baldwin County system. You can see the pre-K program that continues to grow, and I'm going to address that in Baldwin County. You can kind of see our total numbers here. So kind of jumping back into the foundation program and jumping back into your ADM. And so, based on our October 23 snapshot, you can see we had an ADM numbers of 30,668 students. And so they basically take these students, they figure out what grade they're in, looking at the divisors, and that represents the teacher units that you earn. And you can see for this fiscal year, we're 1,777 teacher units. An increase of 11 from the previous year. You can see we dropped the principal unit because that's the virtual elementary school that dropped off the roll. And there was a modest increase on assistant principals. I'm going to talk about that a little bit further down in the presentation. So once we figure out the teacher numbers, basically their information, their degrees, their experiences, those type of things are sent to the state in a report called the LEAPS report, and it's mapped on the teacher matrix, and that determines how much you're going to receive. And so you can see based on the student numbers there, the salaries is $121 million, the fringe benefits is 45. Other current expenses is the one area in the foundation program where we actually have some discretion on how that's to be spent. And I'm going to kind of walk into how we spend it, but just, spoiler alert, it's really all for classified support personnel at the school level. And I'm going to have that breakdown further down in the slideshow here. You can kind of see going into some of the classroom instructional support here. So they did CIS a little weird last year. They did, about 570 in the foundation program. Then they had a supplemental bill that did the rest. Long story short, it was $1,000 for teachers in the classroom. That bumped down to $900 for this school year. As everybody knows, we're using Class Wallet to help manage that, which I think has been a very successful program. The technology allocation, $500 per teacher, stayed the same. Library at $157.72, which just shows that's a plug figure because how else would they put 72 cents in there. Stayed the same. Professional development at $100 per unit stayed the same. Textbooks did go up from $75 per ADM student to $100 per ADM student, resulting in an additional $780,000. And then for the first time since 2007, we actually have common purchase allocation. Common purchase allocation was done away with during the Great Recession and during the proration days and those type of things, and so it's coming back, and so that's a great help because honestly it's used to help cover the things like the copier lease and copier paper and these type of expenses that can add up, and there really wasn't anything that you could appropriately kind of allocate in this category to cover those things. Like I said before, because of our ADM just kind of slowed down, it wasn't quite as massive, which is not a bad thing. Again, I like it when it's manageable. I don't like it when it's kind of like, bam, 800 kids, get ready. We did see a drop in our student growth allocation here. So if you kind of look at all this, you can see based on our ADM, based on the teacher units that we earned, based on the calculations, the total foundation program is $225 million, and that's before the 10 mil match. And I want to kind of point that out because, as everybody's aware, the valuations have been skyrocketing up, and that's going to be in the 10 mil match is a 2-year lag time. And so it's going to take valuations from 2 years ago, and it's going to hit us now. So that has basically a pretty big impact. And so when I look at the 10 mil valuation, again, that's from 2 years ago. You can see that we saw a 36% year-over-year increase in the value of 10 mills in Baldwin County, representing an $11.7 million increase. This is one of the aspects of the 10 mil maps that can kind of hit you in the stomach. And so normally on a growth standpoint, we would have an increase of about $8.4 million. We end up having a loss. And that's with more students, that's with the 2% raise, and that's with all of these kind of proponents in there. And that's because of the valuation and how that formula is calculated. Again, it's not as, yes, sir. Oh, did someone ask a question? Okay. No. All right. Yes, okay.
Exactly how did the preparatory academy affect our ADM numbers? Like those students attending that?
So the preparatory academy, I'm going to talk about that. So they're not actually, so they'll be in the ADM report for this year. So we had to basically, with a new school, and I'm going to kind of walk through the implications because it has some impact on how we budgeted local funding. It's a great question, but they're currently, they don't really affect it because ADM is based on last year's enrollment. And so when we do the ADMs capture for this year, they will actually be included. And so I'm locally funding all the teachers there for this school year. And I'm going to kind of explain what that means on a big picture perspective until we can get called back up. Excellent question. So that was the foundation program. This is some of the other state funding and to kind of bring us to our total. And one of the things I like to do is kind of go down the list and provide the John Wilson comments to this, which clearly demonstrate the problems with our funding formula and clearly demonstrates that the state does not fully fund any aspects of anything. Regardless of what you see on the news, regardless of another record budget, regardless of these type of things, there is massive deficiencies and massive gaps. So, we talked about the foundation program, the teams contract. This is one of the ones that's still kind of revolving. I think we're going to have over 200 teams teachers in Baldwin County. Transportation, we saw an increase of just a little over $1 million, but realize that I'm having to supplement that by additional $3 million to meet the operational cost to run the transportation program. Capital outlay, 100% of that goes to maintenance projects. I'm going to get into this, but you can see some of our maintenance projects on our existing building is close to $20 million. We have about 8.7 from the state that helps offset that. OSR, Office of School Readiness for Kindergarten Program. We'll talk about that in a little bit of detail in a previous slide. Fleet renewal, I'm going to hit this one again, but then fleet renewal is an area that is so underfunded, it's almost disgusting. So the fleet renewal funding is based on $75,000 per bus. That's under 10 years. It costs us almost $150,000 per bus. So, they're still funding it based on, valuations from 15 years ago. It has not caught up by any means of the actual cost of a school bus. And it only covers 16 out of the 32 buses that we're going to be buying in this fiscal year. ARI, so ARI, here we are at the end of August. I don't have our allocation. And that's why it says the same. The State Department sets deadlines on when we have to submit a budget, sets deadlines on when to do it, but they don't give us the allocations in order to meet that. And so I have it plugged in based on last year's allocation. Hopefully it's going to encapsulate the 2%, but it's a very weird model in which they do this, and there's been no communication, which is always fun when you have 32 ARI reading coaches and you have no allocation from the state of Alabama when it was passed in May. But I digress. So if I take that amount, it's going to be 16 out of 32 reading coaches is what it funds. Now, the school nursing program, this is one of the areas that we've talked about a lot that is so incredibly underfunded. We did see a nice $1 million increase in our allocation for this school year, but as you can see, it only funds about 43 out of our 84 RN and LPNs in the county.
Is that funding based on how many RNs?
No. So how they calculate that is insane, and so they fund every system for one nurse, and they do a plug figure based on your ADM. It's not tied on how many schools you have. It's not tied into your nurses. It's not tied into their degrees. It's not tied into anything. It's just a basic plug figure that's deficient. Good question. At-risk is one of these. Is another funding source that nobody knows how they calculate it. It went down by $33,000. It funds 7 out of our 22 social workers. Career Tech Operations and Maintenance Fund is a small amount to help with some of the programs across the county. The Alabama ESL funding went up by about $68,000. It funds 10 out of our 64 ESL positions countywide. Special education preschool went up by $129,000, but it only funds 18 out of our 40 pre-K sped teachers countywide. Gifted, so we went up by 93, but the total allocation is only $481,000. Only funds 4 out of our 42 gifted teachers that we have around the state. So I hope this kind of illustrates the massive gaps in funding every year. These are the things that people don't talk about. These are the things that that's not brought up. The media doesn't report on it, but there are massive funding gaps. We're lucky in Baldwin County to be in a position where we can supplement that with local funds to make up for these massive gaps. The technology coordinator, they gave us $69,000. If you were to hire someone, that's not going to cover their salary and benefit cost at all. So it's probably why the State Department got hacked. That's not funny. I apologize. There's some miscellaneous one-time grants that we've already been awarded, so we went ahead and put in the budget for this year. There's a at-risk sped grant, one-time funding for reading and speech applications that are included in this as well. So you can see all things being said in the grand scheme of the $224 million allocation only going up $451,000. It's basically flat. So now that you've seen our current formula and the problems with it, I'm going to kind of deviate a little bit to give a little bit of an update on what is currently happening statewide. So some of you may be aware, I've been involved on two different sides of following this process. So there's a discussion right now in replacing the education funding formula for Alabama. For those who don't know, the foundation program was passed 30 years ago. And there hasn't been any significant amendments to it since. And so just think about 30 years ago, we were on a cell phone this big and we had dial-up internet. Look at what's changed, but look at what hasn't, our funding formula for funding education. And so I'm involved on the committee through A+ Education, and that's really on an advocacy side. And then I'm going to also be involved, I'm on the board of directors for ASBO, that's the Alabama Association for School Business Officials. I'm going to be involved in diving into the data. And looking at that and seeing what looks good and conceptually, does that work in a practical application? How does that look like? And there's a consulting firm out of Washington, D.C. Called Baldwin Consulting, and they're kind of doing a lot of that. And so hope to be really diving into those details to see, again, if it's done correctly, it can have amazing impact. If it's done incorrectly, it's going to be very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. So this is the slides Bellwether Consulting presented at a dual legislative hearing on August 15th of this year to the Senate and the House. And I just stole a couple of slides from their presentation. But the four principles that they look at when they're assessing a school funding formula, they look at one thing, look at adequacy. Is there enough funding to meet the state's educational mandate? Does the state fulfill in their constitutional responsibility to oversee an educational system that can serve every child? Does the policy allocate greater resource for students with educational needs? Does the policy make clear the decision-making, the locus of decision-making funding for budgeting, and look at the split between local and state responsibilities appropriately? And are the policies clear, understandable of how the funding is calculated and distributed? Like I said before, no one knows how at-risk money is calculated. So the nurse formula is insane and it makes no practical sense. So how do you think Alabama scored on these four areas? Wonderful. So Alabama struggled with these and just looking at adequacy. And so right now, based on some of the nationwide studies here, Alabama ranks, I'm going to jump back into this, but Alabama ranks 39th in the nation on funding on a per pupil standpoint. And so you can say that this study was done by the National Center for Education Statistics, and it's based on fiscal year 22, when you can see Alabama was $14,404, which was $4,000 below the national average, ranking us, 39th in the nation on what we provide there. And if we were to look at Alabama from 07 to 08 on what we provided on per pupil funding compared to the data from this study, and this particular study goes to 22, you can see there was only $1,100 per pupil. That's raw dollars. So when you drill into that and apply the inflation that we've seen over the last couple of years, you can see the funding has actually gone down. They don't report on that. You know, they always talk about another record budget, another record budget. You hear Ivy talk about another record budget, another record budget. It's not a record budget because the spending power has gone down for every school system in Alabama. Yes, ma'am.
You say that 6% was federal. Is every state federal?
Hey, John, could you ask them to use their microphones when they ask questions? I'm so sorry. Is that better? Okay. You said 6% was federal. So we're already lower in state. Does everybody get 6% from federal or?
So 6% is around the average, you know, and that's your Title I calculations, you know, statewide, looking at a percentage. Now, it can vary based on some of the demographics, but you see it from 6 to about 10% is the average you see across the nation. So federal funding, anywhere you go, is not going to be a big part. It's really just a little supplemental additive to help with certain things, to help with poverty, a little bit to help with special education, those type things, but it rarely ever provides significant level of funding to truly move the needle. Student needs, like we showed before, there is minimum to no additional funding if you have a student with disabilities. Like we said, an ADM is an ADM. That's the problem with our model. We all know that doesn't apply to the practical application of serving schools. We know not all students are the same. We know you have students that have, you know, that are high needs in special education. We know the challenges with ESL. You know some of the aspects with gifted. You know all of these type of things. And so lumping everybody into one bucket is a funding formula that was created by people who have never worked in a school system a day in their life because it doesn't match the practical application of what it truly means. And so Alabama fails miserably as far as coming up with a formula that's tied into student needs. There is no correlation from a state funding standpoint between student poverty and additional state aid. There is English language learner funding isn't tied to the actual student needs. It's a plug figure. You know, we have a resource-based formula that's just, hey, this is the budget, and then these are the formulas, and it doesn't actually look at the individual students in each school, individual students in each district, etc. Like I said, the current school finance is complex and complicated and requires all kind of legislative tinkering to try to change these type things. It's just not a good model. And then transparency, you know, again, how do you compute your revenue and how's it being spent? You know, how are you addressing funding inequities? Again, this is not John Wilson's slides. This is a nationwide consulting firm from Washington, D.C. And I'm glad they did an outstanding job presenting. And our legislative, you know, and especially the chair people from the House and the Senate on the ETF needed to hear this stuff. And so it was really good stuff. And so I'm going to kind of be watching it. So just to kind of wrap up this part of what we're looking at. So 45 other states in the nation provide a student-weighted formula for education. Only 5, and Alabama's one of the 5 that's on a resource base. Again, that's an outdated model. And I appreciate the, you know, I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate Orr and Garrett having these meetings to talk about it because I think it's important. And so what we're hoping, the new funding formula, if it gets passed, it's a big if. You know, it's very complicated. It has to go through a lot of different steps. This is kind of how it works. So you come up with a base amount. The base amount represents the cost of educating the students without some of the additional needs, and it creates the foundation block for the rest of the formula. The base amount is going to be critical. What they fund the base amount is going to determine if this funding formula is going to work or not. And so that's where the devil's in the details, and that's where I look forward to diving into it. Once you have your base amount, then you can basically assess based on your student needs in your district, whether it's by poverty, whether it's by special education status, or whether it's by ESL, and you can provide a weighted average on top of that. So where you may earn like one student, if you have a SPED student, maybe 1.5, or an ESL 1.3. And so they're actually factoring in the cost. It costs a lot more to educate and serve certain students. That's just the reality of the world that we live into. There's also other ways that you could potentially add that I think are interesting. Which weights they add, which ones they don't. And so One of the ones is community characteristics like geographic sparsity. And so if you have a rural area, if you have kids every, houses every certain amount of miles, we know the challenges that come with transportation and even finding, teachers to work in schools in those areas. So you could actually add that, or if you have pockets in the county, which is Baldwin County and other areas, we have pockets of poverty. And I'm going to show that in a minute too. You could potentially have other ways to address that as well. So again, this concept is wonderful. The concept, I think, has been successful in other states. The only problem is other states are willing to fund it. And you can see we're $4,000 less on a per student basis than the national average. And so if we want to do this, if we want to do it right, we're going to have to fund it to the appropriate measure. All right, that's all I got to say about that at this moment. So, like I said before, diving into OSR, the pre-K school program, we got 39 classrooms across the county. We serve about 645 pre-K students. I just want to say that, again, I think the pre-K program is such an important program, and it's such a program that has so much, demand, but it's also a very expensive program. Again, you hear the news and they're like, we're top of the nation in pre-K program, top of the nation in pre-K program. That's great, but they don't fully fund it. And so if we kind of look at our allocation for this school year, we're just a little over $3 million. We have no new sites, and our same 5 sped collab units are staying the same. But in order to fully fund the salaries and the benefits and also the provisions that come with this, such as the example here with playgrounds, I'm having to supplement another $2.5 million to make up for that. And so I'm not saying that any of this is wrong or bad. I think it's great. But I'm just wanting to point out how specific it is. And so we do an OSR program. They're like, well, you must have a playground as a minimum 60 square feet, and it must have a fence encapsulated that's no more than 4 feet or higher, and it must have this, and it must have that. And I think that's all good stuff, is that they don't fund it. And so if you want to truly have a nationwide pre-K program fully funded.
John,
Yes, sir.
what are we spending, and we've gone around the county for several years now, what are we spending per playground?
So playgrounds have been something that we've made a tremendous investment with over the last 4 years. So a regular playground for an elementary school is costing us around $300,000. We probably spent over $6 million. Of the $6 million, almost $1 million of that is directly related to OSR pre-K playgrounds. Again, when you do a pre-K playground, it can't be shared with the older or younger children during the playtime. There are all these rules and requirements. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's complex. And I'm all good with complex. Just help us fund to meet the complex demands. All right, so that wraps up state revenue. So we're going to pivot into federal. Again, great questions, everybody. Good stuff. So, not a big increase. Total federal revenue is expected to go up by about $1.4 million. You can see the first one. This is, and I'm going to hit on this one too, because this is another one of my pet peeves. The IDA funding only went up by $5,000. I have a slide. I want to talk about that. We saw some of the Perkins career tech funding pretty much stay flat. And again, we saw Title I money go up by about $1.1 million. And I'm going to talk about that as well because they changed some of the formulas with direct search students that are participating in Medicaid and SNAP and those type of programs are now automatically classified into that. And so you can see, and I'm going to show our numbers in the previous slide, but that's really driving our increase. Title I N&D, we saw a modest increase on that. Title II, we saw that pretty much flat. Title III, pretty much flat, is for English language learners. And the fun thing about our federal Title III is we can't use it to hire ESL teachers. Makes sense, doesn't it? You can do interpreters, you can do other things, but they won't let you do actual teachers. Sounds like a federal program. The Title IV, I just got my allocation like earlier this week, and so I had plugged in last year's as I was putting this presentation together, but it did go actually up to $586,000. A modest increase on Title IV there. USDA, again, this is going to be one of the areas that we're kind of trying to wade through as we win CEP, and that's going to be fully dependent on participation rates. That's where going free breakfast, free lunch, those type of things. we've seen some pretty nice increases in there. And so it's going to be one of the ones I'm going to be kind of amending and watching. You can see the Department of Defense, that covers half the cost of our ROTC structures at certain schools. And then the other federal revenue, one is a grant through the Department of Rehabilitation Services for job coaches for SPED students. So it's a cool grant, and it kind of helps introduce them into the workforce and things that they can excel in. And the other one was a kind of a one-time grant for C&P tied into some supply chain assistance money. So like I said, with special education, I want to point out that, the IDA law passed in the 80s. In the law, it says that the U.S. Department of Education will fund 40% of your education needs. Guys, we barely fund 15%. And so there's a lot of mandates and there's a lot of provisions and a lot of these type of things, and they never even follow their own mandates when it comes to a funding perspective. And I guess when you're at the federal level, when you pass the laws, you can ignore the laws you don't like. It's crazy to me, but it continues to be an issue. And so when you have, right under 5,000 special needs students, and you're only getting, you're only getting about $7.6 million in federal funding to address that, you got to figure out, how am I going to address the other 80%? And so we're having to pull money from the foundation program, we're having to pull money from local in order to get to meet the needs, which is right around $50 million to service these 5,000 students. And these are students that are here from 3 to 21. So, yes,
That doesn't even encompass all our 504 kids where we get $0.
Excellent point. So like Sarah said, 504, there is no federal, there is no state money, there is nothing. It is a completely unfunded mandate without any funding associated with it. Creates a lot of challenges for school systems, not only in the state, but across the nation. You can see our special education county for the board members that have been here for a while. This has been one of the ones, when we were going up from 2013 to 2019, I was waving the alarm because I was like, if we don't get a handle on this, this is not sustainable financially based on the funding that we have. I mean, we saw over that time period a 30% increase in our SPED population. Now, and I want to give kudos to Dawn. I think she's doing a great job in how making sure we don't overclassify kids and coming up with other alternatives instead of immediately just going to the SPED route. And so we saw a dip down with COVID and those type of things, but we've seen a pretty decent increase. And so if I take this chart right here, which is showing our student count, and I overlay it with our federal funding, you can see now our SPED student count is based on last year's numbers, but you can see we went up 91 students, that's a 2% increase. Our federal funding increase is 0.07%. When they gave us an extra $5,000, thank you. That's not going to cover anything. And you can see when they're actually calculating the federal funding calculation, they don't actually use your SPED student count. They use census data, they use poverty data, but they don't actually use the most important database, and that's how many SPED kids you have. And so many aspects of the education funding, whether it's state or federal, completely have been devoid of common sense. And that's crazy. So kind of moving from SPED and looking at, how this is tying into the increase in Title I. So what this chart is it's basically showing the basic historical average of Baldwin County's free and reduced lunch percentages. And so you can see it's kind of been bouncing around the 40% for a number of years. You can see some of the aspects that I highlighted in the slide. During COVID, we basically had the COVID release free CEP program. Nobody filled out lunch applications. We were still utilizing the lunch application data to determine our federal funding, and so that just created a crazy environment in and of itself, and that's why we jumped down to 39. So in the middle of all this, I do have to give them credit, the state credit, and they decided, again, trying to force parents to fill out an application, again, it's not always successful. I mean, it was creating a huge burden on a lot of our staff, a huge burden on the cafeteria managers, a huge burden on a lot of people when they saw a kid that qualified, but their parents necessarily didn't fill out the paperwork. And so instead of having to do that, they changed it. And so the student is what they call direct certified. meaning this is a student that participates in Medicaid, this is a student that participates in the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or the TAMP program, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. They didn't have to fill out the paperwork. And so they were automatically included in our percentage. And so for the first time in probably forever, we actually had a clear indication of what our true poverty numbers were in Baldwin County. And you can see we jumped from 39, almost 40% to 55. And this past school year, we are just right under 60. And what that looks like on a per school basis here, you can see from the highest poverty to the lowest, is that we currently have 26 Title I schools for this school year. You can see Swift, 98% of the students there fall under the federal poverty level. Out of the 26 schools, 16 of our schools have higher than 70% of their student population falls under the federal poverty level. And you can see a lot of these schools are in rural areas, and you can kind of see these poverty pockets. And like I said, looking at the funding formula and looking at how that can help, if you had a metrics that could address that, those pockets of areas that are not only rural, that are also very high poverty, would be a tremendous value to Baldwin County. I know that, I think Terry Dorfel was going out for a grant, and she had, I think, a banker from Fairhope or something against Fairhope, but he just attacked her. He was like, these numbers can't be real, Terry. The school system is manipulating these numbers. And so she forwarded it to me, and I addressed them. I'm like, well, again, it must be nice to live in your bubble. When you go outside your bubble, you can truly see these aren't manipulated numbers. We truly have poverty and needs throughout Baldwin County. Once you kind of go outside of the Eastern Shore, some of these areas and the rural areas, it is clearly seen in the standing. The teachers that work in these schools, they can attest every day to the stories of the needs and the poverty they see every day with these students. Daphne East Elementary School, congratulations, you're 45% free and reduced, and so they are now Title I school for this year. Again, they get some more money, but at the same time, there's more challenges that come along with that. That's probably a thank you to the apartment complexes that continue to be constructed at a massive rate across Baldwin County right now, without really any thought about the implications of what we want to create.
What is the definition of a low-income student?
That is a low-income student, and I got this right here. So basically, a low-income student, you have two different classifications. And so you have someone that would apply for a free meal classification, and that was basically a 1.3 multiplier below the federal poverty. It's a multiplier below the federal poverty levels, which changes, and it's based on your, if you're a family of 4 versus a family of 2, and so it's kind of has some tax implications. So the bigger size of your family, they take your total income, and there's a multiplier that will determine at the time if you're either going to be reduced or free. And one of the multipliers is 1.3 and one's 1.8. And guys, if I misspeak on any of that, feel free to jump in and correct me.
Family size plays into it.
Yeah.
And so the chart is the amount of income comes from the family size that's allowable.
So you had a certain area that, but all of it basically based on the family size, they said this is the classification of the federal poverty levels. And so depending on how far below, just a little bit below it, you qualify for reduced. Substantially below it, you qualify for free. This is why we're able to go CEP. This is why we qualify for the federal assistance, because we're almost 60% poverty in Baldwin County. It's crazy to think about. I live in Spanish Fork, sometimes I'm in that bubble too. I don't realize that. But it's true, and it's what we're seeing. So, all right. Great question. Yes, great question, Greg. So once you surpass 40% of your students fall under the free and reduced percentages, then you qualify for Title I. Now, we don't have Title I for high schools, and there's a reason there, except when they qualify for 75%. And the reason there is that we don't get a lot of Title I funds. And so you can imagine if you have a high school that has, 1,500 students,
and all of a sudden, the federal Title I funding is based on the per student amount, you just eliminated almost all the funding for your SWIFTs and for your deltas and for your Pine Grove. And so that was a countywide decision years ago to do that. Now, once you get 75%, you're mandated to become a Title I program. And Foley High School is, and we have other schools that are kind of knocking on the door. But if all the high schools, because of how big they are in the student population, it's basically you have the same pizza pie, and someone just took a huge slice. And now you got to divide the rest between all the other elementary schools. And so the countywide decision at the time, this is before I got here, was that we'd like to divert it to the elementary schools because we feel like that's where we can make the biggest impact. So you may say, how does this work since we're not actually doing free and reduced applications and that kind of stuff? And so how we're going to continue to track this amount on a per school basis is that we can take our direct cert times a multiplier of, is it 1.6? Yeah, so we're going to take the direct cert numbers. So we'll be able to calculate this on every school, and I'll be able to give an update. And so when you're going to CEP, we can either freeze this for a 4-year period, or we can recalculate it based on the direct certification student times the 1.6 multiplier and reapply, which is going to impact our funding levels. And that's going to be something we're going to look at. And I kind of like that. It brings some stability. We're not relying on chasing after parents and sending out emails and notifications and constant reminders that please fill out the paperwork. We have some stability, and we also have some discretion on if we want to stay with the snapshot of where we are right now, if we want to kind of reassess either on the county or on a school-wide basis. So kind of diving into the CMP program. So just so you know, last school year we served over 4 million meals. And when I say meals, I mean you got breakfast, you got lunch, you got a la carte, you got snacks. By far the largest restaurant service provider in the entire county by far. We have 266 CMP employees countywide. You can see that, again, a couple of these things are kind of estimates as we're trying to fill out is how CEP is going to look. USDA, we estimate, again, this is going to be based on the participation in the school program, but we estimate hopefully, close to $14 million there. Estimated sales, these are going to be additional sales. This is going to be your a la carte items or your second meals or the parent meals when they go eat with their child. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, but we kind of did a placeholder. And again, we're going to be monitoring and amending into the school year. We apply additional local funds to the CMP program of over $6 million. That covers the benefit costs for the CMP employees as well as other needs. And then, like I said before, there are some state rebates and other things that are calculated into this. And so because, the CEP was a little bit of a question mark, if we use the participation rate from this previous school year when it was paid and took our expenses at that point in time, we noticed that CEP would only fund 80% of what that cost is. 80% of the salaries and benefits, 80% of the equipment cost, those type of things. And so I have some reserve ready if and again, because I thought CEP was important, I thought it was critical, and I just thought it was just a good thing to do countywide. And so I have some reserve. We also have about a 6-month reserve in the CMP account, CMP account. So kudos to Aaron and the financial management at the CMP program. We have a strong reserve, have additional reserve, and so we're excited that we can offer CMP program and offer free breakfast and lunch to every child in Baldwin County, regardless of their status. So back by popular demand, I'm going to hit some budget fun facts here. So last year we bought over 4.4 million bottles of 8-ounce, 4.4 million 8-ounce bottles of milk, which is the equivalent of filling up 8 swimming pools. Now I'm not really a fan of milk, so the thought of diving into a swimming pool full of milk kind of makes me want to throw up a little bit, but that's a lot of milk there. Like I said before, last year we were serving about 17,000 meals this time. We're up to 20,000. And so you're starting to see the impact of the CEP program beneficial. We had some schools that have never served breakfast before. And they're serving it for the first time this year. And they have probably the highest participation rate in the entire county. And so, again, it's right now it's very successful. I'll be amending the revenue numbers up based on what we're seeing over the first couple of weeks of the school year. Another fun fact, last school year we purchased over 300,000 pounds of apples. So what does that mean? That means if we stack 12 school buses on top of each other, that would be the weight of apples that we purchased last school year. I say all this to say, we are such a massive organization, and sometimes, you have to take a step back. Everybody sometimes is in their bubble, they're focused on their school, their feeder pattern, their department, their area. And what I see is I see everything as a big picture, and I realize, man, we are a massively huge operation that we run every single day in Baldwin County. All right, pivoting to local revenue here. So the first thing when diving into local funds is you've got to monitor how the countywide funds are split. And so that's by ADM. And so looking at the ADM numbers, you can see there are over 34,000 students in Baldwin County. You can see 89% of those kids go to Baldwin County school system. Gulf Shores has 2,500, roughly 7%. Orange Beach has around 1,200. It's about 3.5% of the total. And so based on the number of students countywide, that depends on how countywide revenue is split. And so looking at our ad valorem, we collect 12 mills. 9 of those mills are countywide. That is going to be divided by that ratio of how many kids we serve countywide. And so you can kind of see some of the estimates for this next school year of $74 million, 89% of that coming to Baldwin County at 66. Gulf Shores getting 7% of that at about $5 million, and Orange Beach getting about 3.5% of that at 2.6. Now the 3 mills is a district tax, so it's going to grab the valuations within the district lines. So that one is not actually based on your student count there. You can kind of see the calculations there based on the latest abstracts. The same thing for the 2% sales tax that we collect. It's divided by your percentage of students in the county. And so of the 2% sales tax, we get 89% of the 1% and 89% of the other 1%. Same with Gulf Shores at 7.3 and Orange Beach at 3.5 there. So kind of tying up a lot of our general, I just kind of focused on the general funds. That's where the majority of our local funds are currently at. We're looking at about an 8% increase in ad valorem. In the past, I've got abstract numbers that showed a 17, 18% increase, and I'm like, my God, I hope this isn't a mistake and they don't have to correct it and revise the numbers down. And so I'm glad to see it stabilize a little bit. I think we're all glad from getting the tax bill, and I'm glad because I look at the 17, 18% increase, and I think in 2 years from now, our state funding is going to take a massive hit. There was also a law that passed that basically said valuations are capped at 5% for the next 5 years. Now, it doesn't include new development and you still have your room to another place. So that's going to have some implications on the ad valorem taxes. Business privilege stays pretty solid. I went pretty conservative on sales tax. You've heard me every month watching it. We're kind of flat on sales tax. I just don't know where it's going to go. So I decided to be as conservative as possible. I actually budgeted on a 2% decline in sales tax. Again, I would much rather be conservative on the budgeting front and come to you guys and say, hey guys, I budgeted to drop 2% and it went up 5%. We have some extra money we can spend. Much more than, hey, I budgeted 5% and went down 2% and now I'm scrambling. And so I'm always wanting to be conservative there. Other county revenue, half of that is the alcohol sales tax. There's the gas and trust revenue there. But what we're able to make up with the drop in sales tax is what we're able to get in interest revenue. And so this is very conservative too, but we're bringing in almost $1 million a month on the depository side, which is huge based. The interest environment is tough if you have credit cards and other things. It's great if you have money to invest in a safe investment that's approved for school systems. And so not only are we getting close to 4% on the depository side, but you probably remembered I think in April, we basically took $30 million and we invested it in a kind of a ladder tier investment structure with CDs. And so we did a 6-month CD, a 12-month CD, an 18-month CD, and we're estimating that's going to bring in another $1.5 million. And so I think we're going to bring in more than $10 million, but I also don't know what rates are going to do. I know there's been a lot of talks about the Fed's cutting rates in September and those type of things. We're going into an election year. How is that going to impact? And so again, I think conservative on the revenue side again, because there's just some unknowns there. But again, what we're losing in sales tax, we're making up by proper treasury management and making sure we're getting the best bang for our buck on the money that's there. Other revenue, again, the after-school program I said, we did an 8% increase in property taxes. Probate, I went 4% increase in that one. I don't really have as clear of an abstract as I do on actual property taxes. I do think that's conservative, but I think all in all, we're looking at a $7.1 million increase in ad valorem. We talked a lot about the 10 mil. The good news is that the 10 mil match does not impact the 3 mil tax districts. And man, have we seen tremendous growth in the 3 mil tax districts. And so for this school year, just a quick, and I'm going to show you kind of the estimates that we're going to have for each of the improved districts, as well as the growth. We're seeing, Fairhope at $3.7 million. We're seeing Daphne at about $2.5 million. We're seeing Central Baldwin at $1.6 million, and we're seeing Spanish Fort at $1.3 million. You're seeing, if you look at Fairhope, you can see it's a 13% year-over-year increase. It's a 70% increase from when it was first levied. Tremendous growth there. I think it exceeded all of our expectations. Daphne, going into their second year, you can see a 30% increase. Now, this is also including probate. It's hard to estimate that, but still massive year-over-year increase. Valuations are increasing, there's growth happening. The Central Baldwin tax district at 32% year-over-year growth. In the estimates that came in from the revenue department, so a tremendous gain in Central Baldwin. And then if you go to Spanish Fort, a 13% year-over-year growth and a 54% increase since it was first levied. So again, tremendous growth. Again, the timing of some of the 3 mills was amazing, really in retrospect. You're really able to capture a lot of this growth. Is it going to maintain and grow to this percentage? Probably not. Is it going to normalize and probably grow by maybe 8% or something? Probably. But tremendous growth there. All right, so that's revenue. Everybody doing okay? So halfway through, everybody good? I got to find a way to include the book in some way in my presentation.
Does the 10 mil match affect Gulf Shores and Orange Beach just like it does? Okay.
Orange Beach gets no foundation funding because of their valuations. It's so high that with only 1,200 students, you don't even get enough foundation program money to meet that. And Gulf Shores is almost, they get almost, I think, I haven't looked at the latest, but I think recently it's been about 60% cut in their state funding based on that. So again, when they left, we did benefit on our 10 mil match going down, but the county as a whole and the valuations are growing, and we're all feeling it right now. Not as bad as the island, though. But they should have known that when they got into that situation. But I won't say anything else. All right, diving into expenditures. So on the expenditure side, so we have 8 different expense functions, and I got 5 main categories of expenses. I'm going to kind of dive through all of that. I'm going to walk through those categories to kind of give a good kind of picture without going into too much detail and being able to finish at a decent time here. But if I look at all funds, all expenditures, everything, you can kind of see the breakout of what we're looking to spend this school year. You can see if I take the capital outlay and combine it with the debt, it's over 41% of all of our expenditures if you look at the debt. What this chart shows is that it shows a district that's working as hard as possible to keep up with the growth demands from the personnel side and the building side. We're having to be competitive to make sure we can staff our schools, our buses, our custodial positions. We have to make sure we have the facilities to account for the growth. And so, this is a school system doing everything in their power, and probably, the governmental agency in Baldwin County that's the most proactive in addressing growth. If I take out the debt, the capital projects, you can kind of see we follow what you normally see when you're looking at a school system budget, and 80% of that is directly personnel. And so if I take all of our personnel, it is $351 million in salaries and benefits. So it is a huge chunk. Again, just to understand the size, scale, and scope, how big we are. $351 million in salaries and benefits. That covers roughly around 4,400 see over 3,100 is directly tied into state funding. And that's your foundation program, there's your nurse, there's what we can fund in transportation, there's ARI, there's OSR, state DSL, state OCE, like I said before. I try to fit as many classified support school people as possible in there, and I'll show you that breakdown in the next slide. You can see in our IDA program, it funds 93 positions. In our title program, it's 44, CNP 266, Fed Other, that's going to be our ROTC programs. I'm going to jump into this one, Mr. Johnson, and really kind of go into more details, but we did see an increase on our locally funded positions, and we're going to kind of walk through that. And so we're up to over 800 locally funded positions, and other locally funded down below, that's going to be your Fairhope 3-mill positions, because they're the only 3-mill that has on a 30-year basis that's built up a reserve to actually start hiring personnel. And it's going to be your kind of district, countywide, after-school support office, because they're funded based on the tuition that's collected there. So before I get into the local units, just so you can kind of see what we're doing with with OCE. So I try to grab as many positions as I possibly can. And so in OCE budget, you can see we have 270 teacher aides, most of these are sped aides. We have, again, the two biggest classifications here are going to be aides and it's going to be custodians. And then between those two, I try to put in the office workers, whether it's the clerks, the registrars, the bookkeepers, some of the technical positions, if possible, to try to fill as much as possible. So the 716 positions here cover about $36.7 million in salary and benefit cost. Now, like I said before, if you look at this slide here, you look at the one from last year, you can see an increase, but you can clearly see the increase is on that front line. And so if you look at our locally funded teacher units, it went up by 70 positions for this school year. Again, a lot of this is transitioning into a new school. Baldwin Prep is currently open right now. Again, the funding is a year behind, so we'll have the funding for next year. That funding will only be for the 10th and 11th grade as the seniors are going back and forth. It'll be the third year that we're fully funded from a 10th through 12th grade perspective. And so we're covering all of that, but more importantly, like I said, we saw a 90 to 100 student drop at every high school. And so the worst thing that I could do is go to the high school and say, hey, you lost 100 kids, I need you to non-renew 6 teachers. I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to pull the rug out from the high schools because of this. Again, we wanted their enrollment to go down. That's part of the growth plan. That's what we wanted to do. And so I increased the locally funded teachers at the high schools because I was not going to pull the rug out from under them. So that, along with with BPA, kind of drove our 80 student increase in locally funded teachers. The other areas on this, that increase that brought us to over 800, was that, again, you saw the SPED numbers, and you saw the increases. We're seeing a big increase in the number of paras we're having to hire to service these kids. And we went very aggressive on the salaries for bus drivers. And as you know, state funding is based on what it would be in 1995. And so we had to basically move a lot of bus drivers into locally funding in order to fully cover the salaries, because we had to go aggressive. We had to pay them so we could have enough bus drivers to drive our buses. And so, if you look at this, you'll see the areas that grew were teachers. You can see it was aides and it was bus drivers. And this chart here shows the cost implications, and you can see it from 07, and the blue line is the salaries, the orange line is the benefits. And this also demonstrates one of the darkest periods in Baldwin County's history between 09 and 010, when probably over 1,000 people were laid off during the RIF era, the BP oil spill, and just a perfect situation of chaos. But you can also see, how we've been slowly building up. You can see, like I've done before, I'm not going to pull the rug out from the schools. I'm going to do the best I can to find the right balance. Just making sure we can afford it, sustain it, and try to minimize interruptions as much as possible in school. And we did that in the 2020-2021 school year with COVID. We had 10,000 students enrolled in virtual school, and we hired almost 100 additional teachers. We did not make any adjustments at the base schools. But when we were presenting, I said, guys, this is kind of a one-year adjustment. This is why we have a fund reserve balance, is to address situations like this. We drop back down. We saw a 800 student increase from the COVID days, and so you can see our total locally funded salaries is over $60 million. And if you look at the 1% sales tax revenue, look at the personnel cost here, you can kind of see where it's kind of inched above it. But I do think as BPA starts rolling, we get state funding for that, and as growth starts to happen at that, as the growth kind of reoccurs, they start absorbing some of the locally funded units that we advanced in, we're going to see our personnel costs drop back below $60 million. But we're just kind of in that transition period. But again, we're starting this year with over $90 million on balance. We're in a great position financially, and that's what I want to do. If I can justify it, sustain it, and not cause as minimal disruption as possible on the school level, that's what I'm going to do. And so does that answer your question, Mr. Johnson? Anything else that I can clarify there? Okay. So talking about this and talking about, this is a new slide here. So, you know, if our teachers were only based on what we earned by the state, what a massive gap we would have. Can you imagine what our class sizes would look like if we only operated by, like Governor Ivey said, our record education budget? It would be detrimental in the classroom. You know, the 337 locally funded teachers cost over $30 million, but I think we can all agree that's where our local funds should be going. It should be going to teacher salaries. It should be going in the classroom. It should be going to these activities. But, you know, you see the county systems across the state that only can operate on what the state provides, and man, do they struggle. So anyway, we're very fortunate in Baldwin County to be able to do that. I know that I've been in presentations where I've had principals and others, they're like, we don't get any support, we're on the bare minimum, and I have to like, you can see me like start to get, you know, start moving around, because it's not true. We've got a tremendous amount of support to all the schools, and sometimes they don't realize just how much it is until I remind them. You don't know bare minimum. You have no idea what bare minimum is and what we do in Baldwin County. If we were to look at the countywide teachers per student, this is not in the classroom. This is the number of teachers divided by the number of students. We're looking at the high school level right under 17. We're looking at the middle school around 16. And we're looking at the elementary school around 14. You know, one of the biggest challenges at the state is that the divisors on 4th, 5th, and 6th grade are over 20. That's insane. It has the highest divisors. It has higher than the middle school. It has higher than the high schools. We've had record budgets. We haven't adjusted divisors for the intermediate grades. It's insane. And so again, a lot of that's having to plug those gaps in the deficiencies that we have from a statewide level. Like I said before, there was a minor adjustment to administrative divisors, in that last year you had to have over 500 students before you earned half of an AP unit. They made a little change, and that said if you have over 300 students, then you earn half of an AP unit. Now, we are already locally providing that, but still, again, you have to have over 750 students before the state provides a full-time AP. Can you imagine? If you're in a school with 90% poverty and you're a principal by yourself and the state doesn't even fund an admin assistant, I mean, that's why so many systems are struggling. They didn't make any changes on the secondary side. Again, it was nice to see this being acknowledged. It's nice to see a little bit. I wish they would have gone farther and provided a more reasonable update here, but hopefully that's something that will come. So looking at APs, you can see we get state funding for 43. We have a total of 78. We locally fund 36 at a cost of about $4.3 million. Looking at counselors, again, this isn't a divisor that hasn't been adjusted in 20 years, to my knowledge. You can see you have to have over 500 students at elementary school before the state gives you a full-time counselor. You have to have, with 750 kids out of high school, you only earn 2. That's not sufficient. And so we earn 59 counselors, we fund 85. We locally fund 26 to fill in that gap at a local cost of $2.2 million. The benefit costs, we saw an increase. We saw about a 1% increase in what the board has to pay for Tier 1 employees. And Tier 1 employees, an employee that was hired before January 2013, We saw a similar type 1% increase for tier 2 employees. So last year it was 12.56, and that's what the board pays as a percentage of the salary to RSA from retirement. It went up to 13.5. In tier 2 last year it was 11.5. It went up to 12.6. So if I take the total employer benefit cost, it's almost $89 million for FY25. And to give you an example of what this looks like, in Baldwin County, a brand new teacher with a master's degree is going to have a starting salary of over $55,000. The employer benefit cost is your PF, your retirement, and your FICA. This is what the board pays. It's going to be an additional $21,000, bringing a total cost of right under $77,000 for a brand new teacher with a master's. Now, when you factor in sub-costs and materials and everything else, it's almost $80,000 for a brand new teacher. So you can imagine you being a teacher with 10, 15, 20 years, the cost does go up. So just a lot of people don't realize, they just see the salaries, they don't realize the other side of what we are obligated to pay on the board side. Diving into debt service. So we've got, for this school year, we start the first principal payment on the phase 5 pay-as-you-go line. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in another slide. But we've got $26 million in principal payment. We've got over $8.8 million in interest payment for a total principal and interest payment of just right under $35 million. Looking at an amortization schedule and looking at where we're looking, you can kind of see some of the areas. Next year, hallelujah, we will finally be paid off on all of our state bonds. And so when I came in, we had a tremendous amount of state bonds and these type of things. Next year, we will pay that. It's popping up like that because we've been contributing money into a sinking fund to handle the balloon payment at the end of the term. So it's not actually going to cost us that, but then we're done with state bonds. I mean, my predecessor took out state bonds that went to computers that only lasted a year and a half, and we're just going to finally be paying that off next year. That's not anything John Wilson will ever do, and I'm so glad that we can put that behind us next year when it's fully paid off. But you can kind of see going into the 29-30 year, we're going to have our 2005 bonds pay off, as well as the phase 5 pay-go program pays off. That's going to leave us remaining here on our 2007, and then we go to 41 with the $50 million bond that we did for Baldwin Pro. Now, again, it drops down, but we know in reality, unless for some reason we just stop growing, we're probably going to continue with phase 6 of the pay-go program, et cetera, et cetera. But you can kind of see the long-term horizon of what our debt obligations are here. So again, you want to see your long-term debt kind of declining. And so when I started, it was the opposite way. And so again, I'm proud to be able to kind of show a much more manageable long-term scope here. Like again, looking at all your fund sources, looking at everything, bringing in it based on the different classifications on our financial statement. So I just want to say, don't be alarmed by the first line. If you look at the first line, it looks like we're cutting instructional expenses. That is not true at all. We had over almost $30 million in one-time federal money that went into that line item for this past year. That's gone. And so again, when you factor that in, you realize we're actually increasing it. And I'm going to show that. But again, just like I said before, this kind of shows like I showed all of our revenue and all that, this shows all of our expenditure by function. And you can see where are we kind of allocating all of our funds. It's in the classroom and it's the built classrooms. And this is a system that continues to try to do everything we can to keep up with growth. Now, when I pivot over to the general fund, which is not going to include federal revenue, it's the operating funds, it's your state, it's your local, you can see that we're actually showing a year-over-year increase in what we're going to spend on instructional service and instructional support services. A lot of that has to do with the 2% ratings that was passed by the state. And you can see modest increases in the other areas, and I'm going to kind of walk through that as well. If I'm just looking at the general fund, which doesn't include capital or debt, you can see instructional support is almost 80% of what we're going to spend this fiscal year. So I'm going to show all those categories, but I'm going to drill down by different, all the different function categories. I'm going to drill down by the expense category that the state makes us use. And so we've got 5 categories here. And so you got personnel services, obviously this is going to be your salary and benefits. You got purchase services. I'm not a big fan of purchase services in the way the state makes us classified because it's so vague. So the definition for purchase services is any cost or services which by nature can be performed by a person or firm with specialized skills, knowledge, services performed by persons other than school employees, etc. It's very vague. What is purchase services? It can be utilities, it can be professional development, it could be, it could be legal fees, it could be a number of things. It could be paying the internet bill, it could be postage. It's just so vague that it's not my favorite, but again, it's what we have to work with. Materials and supplies, anything that can be consumed or worn out, textbooks, periodicals, custodial supplies, food supplies, etc. Capital outlay, pretty self-explanatory. Any capitalized buildings or equipment and debt service. So I'm going to quickly go down all the different categories and then show you a percentage of what we're spending in each based on those definitions. So if I look at instructional support, we have a budget of $282 million, and 95% of that is personnel cost. 4% of that is materials and supplies, whether that's instructional textbooks or that's instructional software. About 1% is purchase services, which a lot of that's associated with PD. If I was to dive into operations and maintenance, you can see about 31% of the $62.9 billion is tied into just utilities and insurance. Our insurance has been going up too. It went up went up pretty substantially this year. You can see the personnel is 32%. SRO is kind of in this category, is 6%. The janitorial and maintenance supplies is 15%. So if you have someone call you and they're like, I don't understand why the principal's making me bring paper towels to the school, tell them that you shouldn't, because we have millions of dollars budgeted for janitorial supplies. That's like my pet peeve. When they're like, make sure you bring tissues, and I'm like, no, it's accounted for. Don't do that. Focus on other things. Maintenance repair services is 16% there. He's not here, but I just have to make fun of him because he knew I was going to do a long PowerPoint. It's like Christmas morning, Jeff. I know Jeff is so sad he couldn't be here for this 2-hour budget presentation. But our school resource officers, our budget is $3.8 million. It covers 63 SROs at a cost of $60,000 per officer, plus we cover $80,000 admin and $5,000 for additional training. Jumping into auxiliary services, specifically relating to transportation, is $28.6 million. 65% of that's personnel, 10% of that's fuel, bus parts, 20% of that's the actual school buses, and 5% is purchase services associated with running the transportation department. So like I said before, we're going to buy about 32 buses. 27 of those are 72 regular passenger buses, 5 of those are special needs. Estimated cost is right under $150,000 per bus for a regular 72 passengers and almost $165,000 per bus for a wheelchair accessible special needs bus. All of these buses will be equipped with an air conditioning system as well as kind of a 3-year warranty in the same manner that we typically do. Also on the horizon, I don't know when this is going to hit, but they're saying that there could be some additional EPA guidelines that can increase the cost of the bus by $20,000 per bus. This is where the state has got to step up on this, and they have to. Other counties across the state are just not going to be able to provide transportation if there continues to be such a huge lack of funding. And so with fleet renewal, we're getting $2.3 million, and I'm covering roughly another 2.4 to get us to those 32 buses. Another budget fun fact, the average number of miles driven last year was 3.8 million miles in Baldwin County. What does that mean? That means you could circle the Earth 154 times at the equator, or you could travel to the moon and back 8 times. And it costs you $3 million in fuel costs. So anyway, again, massive. I mean, we are traveling the roads. I mean, over 400 buses traveling almost 22,000 miles a day, picking up and dropping off kids. Massive organization that we are. Service vehicles. vehicles, again, I want to say I appreciate the board's support on this, on service vehicles. Building up our fleet has saved us millions and millions of dollars in travel reimbursements. We are the largest geographical county in Alabama, and we're paying everybody, 68 cents a mile, and we have a lot of itinerant teachers and employees that travel between schools. It costs millions and millions and millions of dollars. We're able to buy what we call our white fleet, our cars, our service trucks, and we're able to service it internally. We're able to save millions of dollars and continue to make sure our staff can travel around the county as needed. So because we've made kind of such investments over the last couple of years, it's very minimal this year, and so we're only doing about $300,000, and that $300,000 is really going to just be replacing the chassis for some of our F-350s. So it's about $60,000 each if I was to buy a new F-350, or probably close to 90. And so kudos to the transportation department. I'm surprised they're not here. Usually they're here for the budget hearing. Sam, Jacob, Glenn, these guys are doing a tremendous job figuring out ways to continue to operate in a very efficient manner, such as let's keep the bodies, replace the chassis, we can have a whole new life on these buildings, on these trucks. As you may have known, the band trucks, wow, I mean, this was a 2.5-year process, but man, did they turn out awesome. There's been a tremendous outpouring of support across the county and across the state. We've had school districts reach out from 8 different states saying, how did you do it? Who'd you buy it from? Was there a grant? How'd you afford it? And it's funny, I'm like, no, there was not a grant. There's no magical solution there. It's called strategic budgeting, locating the need and providing support to address that need. And so this has been a super exciting initiative. And I think just in year 1, we're seeing an increase of the 9 kids that want to be in the band program. They see the support we're providing, and they're like, I want to join this now. Because of that, we're going to go ahead and put an order for about 5 more trucks. Now, it could take us another 2 years to get it, but I figured I might as well order it now. Any programs that grow, they'll get another one. We'll also have a couple of spares if we run into an issue or something breaks down. C&P, if you look at the budget, again, the budget is substantially higher than our estimated revenue. It's something I'm going to monitor this year, but we have a big fund balance in the C&P. Also have reserves ready to help, but you can see 44% of that is personnel, 45% of that is food costs. And then materials, supplies, and things in the kitchen makes up about 11%. And then we have a small 1%, which a lot of that is maintenance contracts for the kitchen supplies. So I look around the room. I feel like I've got a few people like, man, I like these charts. This is good. Most people are like, what am I going to do this weekend? Everybody else is like, when is John going to stop talking? Holy crap. I'll throw in some chart jokes because I'm a nerd like that. General admin expense, and again, I'm going to keep rolling fast. Again, transparent. Again, have you seen a more transparent financial presentation? So anybody who says we're not transparent, where are you? Come sit and listen. General admin services, you can see, is $17.5 million, 57% is personnel. This is where it gets a little bit misleading. 26% of it is our server and infrastructure costs. The state requires us to put in the same category as general admin. If we have a one-on-one, and that's how we're doing instruction, it should be instructional, not admin. And so, but, I mean, it is what it is. The state, formula is still like it was in 1995. And so when you're looking at the admin percentages, I'm going to show some later, just realize that 26% of that is actual servers, infrastructure tied into the Chromebook system. And you can see legal fees have dropped dramatically thanks to Ms. Young. And then we have some other kind of modest purchase services. A lot of that's the lease for copiers across the district. The business and HR systems are in here, and then just kind of miscellaneous materials and supplies. Other expenditures, this is activities and programs outside of the normal school day. So this is the pre-K program, this is the after-school care program with a budget of about $9.4 million here, and this doesn't include some of the federal funds that go to supplement it. So again, I want to give huge kudos, and she's here, to Ms. Prolinger, who's over the pre-K program, and I also want to give huge kudos to Ms. Jackie Helms over the after-school program. Baldwin County has the largest after-school program, the largest pre-K program in the entire state of Alabama. They're not only the largest, but they're the most aggressive in the state. And if you don't believe me, go travel to other areas. So again, they continue to do amazing things every year, and so just kudos to them. I always want to give a shout out to the people that are just killing it behind the scenes. Looking at PPE expenditures here, again, this is the same formula that the State Department does. That's uploaded to the basically to the federal department. Now you're wondering, like, why didn't you just grab it from the state website, because they haven't posted it since 2022. But I know the formula and how they created it, so they're a couple of years behind on posting it, but if I'm 2 days behind on posting my stuff, they remind me. But again, that's a whole other discussion. So you can kind of see, looking at the PPE expenditures for the 24 budget versus the 25 budget, you can see an increase of 13,016 compared to 14,000 here. You can see how that compares. You can see we saw a modest increase in instructional services, student support services, a pretty big jump in operations and maintenance. Guys, we're doing a lot of things. We're replacing the floors, we're putting LED lights, we're doing bathroom renovations, we're doing as much as we can to our existing schools, and I'm going to talk about that as well. So you can see every single one of these areas increased except for one. And so everyone's like, set your office. Again, general admin services went down. And so when you look as a percentage of the whole, we are a very efficient organization. And don't believe me, look at other areas. Look at their percentage of G&A compared to revenue. And then come back and you will see we are one of the most efficient organizations in the state. I have a slide on that, maybe not, but I think that was the point I was going to make in one of the pie charts that I did. But you can see, if you look at the total expenditures, our general administrative expenditures is 2.4%. 2.4%. And that's what I want to say. We are extremely efficient. You compare that to other school districts across the state and nation, and the average is about 4 to 5. And so when people scream about central office or those type of things, they're not looking at the big picture, they're not looking at the big perspective, they're not looking at comps. What is not in the PPE here is our pay-as-you-go program. Our pay-as-you-go program is not some magical program where money just appears. It is a very strategic budgeting program that's very intensive on the cash flow side. And so it takes a huge investment to pay off these schools in a 4-year period, to the tune of almost $1,200 per student. But what it does is that instead of taking a 20 or 30-year bond and having to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in interest, we're basically strategically budgeting on the front end, putting the investment, getting it paid off on a 4-year period, and literally saving hundreds of millions of dollars in interest expense, as opposed to going for a long-term bond. But it's something that's very intensive on its demand on the cash flow side. But it saves us hundreds of millions in interest expense over a long-term period, and it allows us to be more responsive to growth demands. After a 4-year period, it's paid off. That means we can roll the financing back again, and we can target that in the areas that we need to target based on the latest data and information. Speaking of that, we're going to jump into some of our projects, and then I'm going to be done. So again, appreciate Frank, appreciate Marlena, appreciate them kind of helping me keep everything straight. Appreciate Frank and all the projects we have going on across the county. Marlena helping me keep it straight, make sure all the contractors are getting paid on a timely manner. Again, it's huge. So we're going to look at a couple of different ways. We're looking at ground, building, HVACs. We're going to talk about athletics, and we're going to hit some of our major construction projects here. And I know this is a lot, but I feel like it's important to talk about. So we have some carryover projects that we put in last year's budget we didn't get to, from paving, playgrounds, bleachers. We have some new paving projects, new playgrounds, and additional bleacher repair, whether that's inside the gymnasium or that's outside. at your soccer field, your baseball field, your football field, et cetera. When it says full budget, this means I give Frank Boatwright a budget, and he gets to use that based on his assessments of the needs throughout the county. Continuing on ground improvements, we're going to make some, continue to have some identified canopy repaired, as well as continue to have some money available when needed. Same thing with fencing, same thing with sidewalks. Storage buildings is one of the areas that a lot of people don't think about, but it's something that we're continuing to invest in within our schools. Grounds, a lot of that is going to be if all of a sudden, we have drainage issues at a school, there's $325,000 we can do to address that. Lighting, it says Baldwin County High School football field, but it's actually the track at Baldwin County High School. So we're going to look at putting some lights around the track behind the high school there. So that's something that I told the board about a year ago that we're going to do, and it's in the budget to do it now. Some building improvements, you can look, we have some carryover projects related to roofing, generator at Foley High School, fire alarm, the Fairhope West. Again, you don't know what kind of roofing issues may happen. You don't know when somebody's going to call you with water leaking in their classroom. You want to make sure you have a pot of money to address it quickly when it does happen. And so there's a full budget of $800,000, a generator pool budget, and also addressing the fire alarm and doing an upgrade to that at Daphne High School. Like I said before, if you've gone into any of our schools, you can see we've done a tremendous investment in replacing the floors on all of our campuses. And so we have the LVT kind of new floors. I think they look amazing in all of our schools. We're about to wrap that up countywide. Thanks to Frank and his guys, they've done a tremendous job. So not only building new schools, we're continuing to do maintenance and improvements to our existing schools. Gyms. Gym floor is taking a lot of money to try to maintain and keep them shiny and looking pretty. That's in the budget here. There's some ceiling replacement budgets there at Baldwin County and Daphne High. Restroom renovation budget, miscellaneous building improvements if we need to replace a window, a door, those type things. We're going to be doing some renovations at North and South Baldwin. South Baldwin is going to be the countywide hub for the transportation department. It's a great area in the middle of the county, and so that is where they're going to be doing a lot of their training. We're also going to take the auto mechanic bay from when South Baldwin's there, and that's where we're going to service our light fleet vehicles. So it frees up room for buses to be served in our bays, and we'll have a designated shop for our fleet. So again, that plan just kind of fell together beautifully because we like to use it and not let a building sit there and deteriorate. North Baldwin is going to be some renovations. Frank's going to move some of the guys in construction and maintenance over there. We're looking at doing some paving there too, so we can have another location to house buses in the summertime. HVAC improvements. HVAC is one of the things that is very, very, very expensive. And so we have a lot of care, but you got to stay on top of them. Nothing's worse than coming into a school and the AC is not working. Frank and his guys do a tremendous job of jumping right on there. And so they do a tremendous job of addressing that. I want to make sure we have the support to address it. So you can see we have carryover projects of 2.8, an additional $4 million of HVAC pumps and boilers that we're going to do across the county. About $6.8 million for this next fiscal year. Real quick, you can see inflation. Inflation is killing us in this area. You can see if I took a Magnolia chiller that we did in 2020, it cost me $80,000. Look at what it cost me in 2020 at Foley Middle, it was $171. The Central Baldwin chiller in 23 was $140,000. The Fairhope Middle chiller almost doubled the cost of that at $375. So you're seeing 75 and 100% increases in inflation. Athletic enhancements. This is very exciting. I do want to say that a couple of things before we get into this. It's almost impossible to have the same dollar amount for every school. There's another factors here because you have different needs, different designs. You may have the same design, but it's on a different site. It's going to be a different site package, different on how the utilities work. Or if it's bid out at a different time, it's going to do that. So my commitment to the board here is that when all these projects are done, I'm going to figure out what the average is. And if there are any high schools that are below the average, I will make them whole. I will contribute money to make sure everybody is at the same average. And in my experience, that's the best way to do that. But you can kind of see here, Baldwin County High School is 32% complete on their athletic enhancements. Spanish Force 38%. Alberta High School 75%. A lot was done kind of incorporating the field house and the new gym and those type of things that help part of the high school. Daphne High School is just kind of starting as there's a lot of things that has to kind of be shifted around as far as the softball field has to be shifted to make room for parking, which is going to be consumed by the new cafeteria. And so there's multiple steps with Daphne. 5%, Foley is 6% done. Just a reminder that Baldwin County High School, Foley, and Robertsville are getting an additional about $3.5 million for a banner. That's included in this cost. And Fairhope High School, it says 24% complete because we had to shift the parking lot to the front in order to make up room to do the secondary gym where the parking lot was. So that percentage complete is including the parking lot there. Pay-as-you-go Phase 5 projects, you can kind of see, I've moved Loxley Elementary out, we're still funding it, and I'm moving Daphne South in. And so we have an $80 million 4-year bond that's going to be in 2 installments. I took out a $40 million withdrawal last October. I'll be bringing another $40 million withdrawal this October. Every draw resets the interest that you pay on it. For 80, we're able to supplement an additional $47 million over about a 3 to 4 year period to come up with right under $130 million to address these. Daphne South, New Alberta Middle School, Daphne North Classroom Addition, Magnolia Classroom Addition, the cafeteria at Daphne High School, and the Alberta Elementary New Gym and Cafeteria expansion there. Talking about inflation, if you look at the cost of classroom additions, I mean, these are all very similar. You can see in Daphne East in 2018, we're $145 a square foot. Look at Daphne Middle School in 2019, we were $214 a square foot. The jail area new addition in 2020 was about $187 a square foot. The Magnolia addition came in $361 a square foot. That's a little higher than I expected, but we're moving forward on that. Here's another interesting slide. You take the same exact design, and so if you go to Cabernet, Stonebridge, and Silver Hill, to what will be Daphne South and Loxley, they're all look exactly the same. It's the same design. It's the same architect. It is not the same cost per square footage, and that's a clear example of how inflation is really creating challenges in Baldwin County. You can see the Baymanet K6 was $150 a square foot. Stonebridge was $183. Another one that's similar to this would be Mathis. Silver Hill came at $281, Daphne South was at $290, and Loxley was at $304. So, inflation, look Debbie Downer here, but again, the reality of the inflation of what we're seeing right now is that I may not be able to address it as aggressively as I have been. Hopefully it's going to go down, but again, if you're looking at $40 million cost on an elementary school and use the cost of 20, it has some limitations, especially if sales tax goes down and those type of things. But again, we have a shock reserve where they, and again, revenue comes in, I'm going to be moving into the capital projects fund, I'm going to be building back our cash reserve there, and try to tackle as many capital projects as possible. Additional things outside of the pay-go, this is just an example of me scrounging every bit of money I possibly can from every single source to try to do as much as we possibly can across the county. The ag program was at South Baldwin. I did not move to Baldwin Prep. So we're building an ag building at Robertsville High School that can kind of house that program. Like I said before, Loxley Elementary School was in pay-go. I got an extra one-time $30 million of A&T money from the state, so I've applied that for Loxley Elementary School. And so that really only equates to a $10 million difference in order to fund that. Silver Hill, I used about $7 million of A&T. I used Phase 4 pay-go money. I used some local Spanish Water Elementary School, which is 85% complete. We used PSCA and local money above that. Transportation, we're looking at a $4.5 million Eastern Shore shop. It's going to be behind Daphne South. And like I mentioned before, we're looking locally to a pre-K early learning academy in Silver Hill. So looking at all of this, tremendous amount. So when you were looking at the pie chart, you're like, it's personnel and then it's buildings. This is what we're doing. We're doing a lot of ground improvements, building improvements, HVAC improvements, athletic improvements, new school construction in Phase 5, new school construction based on money that I can scrounge together. And then we've got about $5.6 million left to pay in Baldwin Prep. So the price tag in Baldwin Prep is just kind of right under about $95 million. We're 95% complete. They're still wrapping up the shop areas and those type things. I had to do a news interview in July about how the Megatronics thing got stuck in the Red Sea, and we were hoping that homage doesn't bomb it. I never thought I'd be interviewed on my perspective of Middle Eastern politics, but here I was. Good news, Megatronics. I keep thinking of like Megatron from the Transformers every time I see it, but it's here. It's set up. This is actual pictures from BPA. It looks awesome. It's a 2-story industrial maintenance training module, and it's here. Once we got out of the Red Sea, a hurricane was in the Atlantic as the boat was coming through, and I was like, holy crap, I used federal funds to pay for this. If it doesn't get here, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. Actually, it was sweating every day, yes. But again, as we talk about Megatronics or Megatron, we can't forget about my new favorite toy that I like to call Optimus Prime. And anyway, let's go to this. My little robot fork reader, working every night, working every day, working weekends, working holidays, making sure that fork's clean. Anyway, all right, I know everybody's thinking, come on, John, wrap it up. We've been here for too long. Let's wrap it up here. General fund summary, we're hoping to start the beginning period at $90 million operating revenue, of $447 million in our general fund operating expenses of $445 with an excess balance of close to $2 million. Understand that revenue is budgeted very conservatively, but we hope to end the fiscal year at a $92 million balance at this time, roughly next year. So this is the end of the first hearing, and so the first hearing is basically input. And so there's input sheets that I bring out every day. I don't think anybody's ever grabbed them. But any questions or anything, I'm obligated to answer. So this is your chance. So any questions, email me. I will address them at the second budget hearing on September 26th. This budget presentation, as well as the detailed budget books that show this information on a per school, per department basis, is located on our website at bcbe.org.accountability. That's my web address right there. And I think my work here is done. Thank you, guys. Thank you. It's always a way for me to go. I'm excited about continuing to see Baldwin County grow and do amazing things.
I'm always amazed when you do this, the size and scope of this county and what goes on. So thank you so much, and thank you everybody on that table over there for making it happen. Thank y'all. I guess that concludes our business for the evening. Thank you.